to 70 pesos per kilo.
ABS-CBN and TV5 parents have agreed to put their landmark investment deal on hold to address issues raised by regulators and lawmakers. A veteran lawmaker says the deal did not violate franchise laws.
Digital transactions soar in the first half of the year. The Bangko Sentral expects the figure to go higher as digital banks that have been granted licenses are now fully operational.
And in another sign of an economy that is recovering from the pandemic-induced downturn, domestic air travel spikes in the first semester of 2022.
We begin our broadcast with small supermarkets and retailers raising concerns over the sudden drop in sugar prices in 3 major supermarkets in the country. In an interview with 1PH's Sa Totoo Lang, Philippine Amalgamated Supermarkets Association President Stephen Kua said that smaller stores cannot compete with the 70 pesos per kilo price of sugar offered by SM, Robinsons, and Pure Gold.
The smaller retailers cannot afford that. Kaya ang hiling namin, siguro, pwedeng bentahan kami ng wash sugar kahit na at 68, so we can sell at 70, di ba? Yeah. Wala kaming white sugar at 70, pero meron kaming wash, di ba? So, parang tao, hindi na pumuntang palayo pa. It's unfair playing field, no? Kasi, syempre, yung tao, 70 lang ang asukal, nakatibid na kaagad ng 30 pesos, no? Kaagad, doon na tayo mamili.
But Malacanang clarifies the 70 pesos per kilo price of sugar offered by the 3 major supermarkets is only temporary. Once their supply of sugar is fully consumed, they will revert to prevailing retail prices.
We might not need to respond kasi makakabenta dire yung magiging effect sa kanila, then magre-responde ang ating gobyerno.
Meanwhile, Samahang Industriya ng Agrikultura President Rosendo So believes that the price of sugar could drop beginning next month.
Nakikita naman natin yung mga local miller, ang bigay lang is 45 pesos no? And
been said about this whole sugar fiasco, which has gone sour by the day. To find out how deep of a problem we're dealing with here, we have Fermin Adriano, former Agriculture Undersecretary for Policy, Planning and Research. Mr. Adriano, good day. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Jess, and good morning, Danny.
Okay, so first things first, is there a shortage in sugar supply, or is this like what the palace and some of the Senate and even some of sugar stakeholders are saying, that this is all artificial?
Well, based on official data, that we look and examine SRA, USDA, OECD, etc., there's a real shortage. But the problem is there's a confusion between what they call the wash or raw sugar and the refined sugar. We are relatively sufficient in terms of the raw sugar. In fact, we have a thin from 2013 to 2021. We have a thin surplus of about 1,400 metric tons per year for yung brown sugar or raw sugar. But definitely we have a shortage in terms of refined sugar because the annual shortage is about 384,000 metric tons. And these are the ones being used by your bottling companies, etc., food processor, etc., some of the food processors. So if we need to be able to distinguish between the two, and that's the reason why the refined sugar is so expensive. They can offer it at 70% and sustain it at 70% for raw sugar because we are relatively sufficient on raw sugar, and I think by next month it's the harvest season. But the refined sugar is a different issue.
Sir, how major or how rampant is this so-called hoarding or smuggling of sugar? What percentage is being smuggled or hoarded? Or are these images that we are seeing in the news, the stockpiles in different warehouses, one-off situations and don't necessarily, categorize or characterize the entire sugar industry?
It's quite difficult to really determine whether it's hoarding or not. Because if you're a big company, for example, you're going to stock sugar for about 2 months in order to maintain the continuity of your production. Importing sugar is not just like ordering from one of those shopping malls, the e-commerce like Lazada, or it takes about 3 months or 2 to 3 months before the sugar arrives. So you have to properly schedule it. So if you say, okay, you have found in the warehouse about thousands of sugar, well, that's part of our supply chain kind of planning production. How can you say it's hoarding? You know, the big companies would do that for obvious reason. That's just a problem. And secondly, if you're saying that there's so much smuggling and hoarding in economics, it's already an indication that there's a shortage, because traders will not engage in those kinds of activities if there's sufficient supply. Those are already symptomatic of a shortage if you do smuggling, hoarding, etc., etc.
Sir, but what makes the situation today different from past situations wherein there may have been or may not have been shortages, or like you mentioned, it's part of the business model naman to be stockpiling sugar? Why suddenly the increases have made it go up to 100 per kilo?
It's because that there was a very devastating typhoon that hit most of our sugar producing region areas, particularly I think the western part, Region 6. And that destroyed a lot of crops and even affected some of the mills. That I think it's Typhoon Odette. And that's the reason why you need about 7 months to be able to plant and grow sugar. And therefore, it has that devastation, damage that they experienced had impact on our current production. And that's the reason why even as early as this year, the SRA was already saying that we are going to have a shortage because of the damage that was done by Typhoon Odette to our sugar plantations and even some of the sugar mills.
Now, like what Danny was pointing out earlier, I mean, this is not the first time that we've heard reports of shortages when it comes to sugar supply. In fact, in your Manila Times column, you decried how we were once the top sugar producers and exporters around in 50s and 70s, only to become a laggard in the industry. When did things go downhill and what went wrong?
Well, it started because of I think we overprotected, we overregulated the sugar industry. And there were regulations that allowed them to just be comfortable without improving their efficiency and competitiveness. For example, the sharing arrangement, the 60-40, you know, if you are a sugar plant and you get 60% immediately, you have the Takidan system, that you have access to the US market. So there was not much imperative to improve your efficiency. And that has been ongoing for more than 50 years. Because of overregulation, overprotection of the government, that, you know, somehow, like what we've seen some companies in the 1990s, that they were protected by high tariffs, by subsidies, there was never a incentive for them to be able to make their operations efficient. And that has been the analysis of the economists. The economy is saying that we need to remove this protection so that we will grow these producers, both producers and millers, to become more efficient and competitive. Unfortunately, because of the strong political lobby, we are unable to do that. You know, the highest tariff levels in agriculture is in sugar. It's 50 for the minimum access volume and 65% for outside of that. The minimum access volumes allows certain quota, for example, 64,000 to come in at lower tariff as part of our WTO agreement.
It's higher than rice.
50, 60, 35%. That's practically double. So you see, it's so overly protected throughout these years.
So can I just add to that, no, sir? Sir, are we still competitive as an exporter? Because we've had several people on the show saying that, you know, it's even as an export product, we are too expensive. Sugar.
It's impossible because the data shows that our raw sugar is 2.7, 3.1, and 4 times greater in cost, wholesale price, vis-a-vis Brazil, Australia, and Thailand, respectively. And for refined sugar, we are 3 and 4.2 times more expensive compared to Brazil and Thailand. So how can you export?
Now, you have the government at least now trying to come up with some immediate solutions, band-aid solutions, if we may call it that. I mean, for one, it's more or less a done deal, importation of 150,000 metric tons of sugar. Then at the same time, you have a price cap on sugar in the 3 larger super retailers. Are these steps enough?
Well, the last one you're saying is that it's not sustainable. Even Press Secretary was already admitting that. The second one is that even with the 150, it is not enough because in our calculation, it will alleviate somehow the supply shortage. For raw sugar, 150, there will still be a remaining deficit of about 68,000 metric tons by the end of 2022. And for refined sugar, in our calculation, there will be a remaining deficit of, despite the 150,000 metric tons, 169,000 metric tons. Because we were importing about 319,000 metric tons of refined sugar. So if you have 150, you still have remaining balance of about more than 150. It will partly alleviate it, palliate it, but the prices will remain high. I don't believe what Mr. Rosendo says that
By next
prices,
month.
I'm willing to bet, prices will go down. Generally, not only in the 3 stores, because those are just boutique experiences or boutique, it does not benefit the entire millions and millions of consumers. How many people can go to those street supermarkets? So in terms of policy, you come out with a policy that will provide the maximum benefit to the greatest number of people. It's not just 3 stores or something like that. It has to be the general public or consumers that will benefit. That's the kind of policy that we should be pursuing, not this show type of, activities. Unfortunately.
Okay, but sir, I mean, if that happens, then the only solution seems to be importation at the moment, diba? Because you mentioned that it's been overprotected. And if so, how much should we be importing? You said that 150,000 metric tons is not enough. And would this not impede what you mentioned, the development of the sector? There need to be more efficient. There need to be investing if people are
And how do we
reliant
incentivize
on
them to actually
imported
scale up?
sugar.
I think we need to come out with a master sugar development plan. It has to be a master plan. Unfortunately, because of the current situation, it's inevitable that we need to import. But that's a very short-term solution to the problem. The long-term solution is to address the structural problems of the industry. Like, for example, as already mentioned, this problem of sharing arrangement, this problem of kedan, the fragmentation of our sugar lands into minuscule sizes because of the prolonged implementation. There are quite a number of them. The government must come out with a sugar master plan that will turn around the fortune or the fate of the sugar industry. Otherwise, it will continue its downward trend and eventually become a moribund state. So that's the challenge right now, to come out with the sugar master plan that will be acceptable to the different stakeholders. This is a very, very political issue because of the powerful sugar lobby, which has been there since our sugar relationship with the U.S., part of the Laurel-Langley trade agreement. So it requires a lot of political will, the bottom line. And coming out with the sugar master plan, which will take about 5-10 years to implement or more, is the only solution that I can think of. Right now, the importation, as I said, is an immediate short-term solution and will not solve the structural or address the structural problems of the sector.
So, sir, just to follow up on that, what specific change needs to happen, and what do you want to see in the sugar master plan right now?
Well, specifically, the first thing that I would, my aspiration is, if we're going to come out with decision, let's come out with decision based on solid empirical evidence. Look at the supply and demand. I think we need to go to official data, official figures, and base our decision on the analysis, sound analysis with methodology coming out from that supply and demand analysis. You cannot just say 150 or something like that without looking at hard facts or hard evidence. I think that's my first, desire. I want that has to be embedded in the decision making of the government. So the master plan will have to be a balancing up. How do you balance the interest of the vast majority? Because there's a clashing interest here. The interest of the producers and the millers, and the interest of who want high prices, and the interest of the consumers like us who want to have low prices, including the food processors. Your ordinary banana queue, kamote queue, etc., are huge users, gulaman of sugar. They want it lower. So those are competing interests. We need to have a balancing up. Who do we want eventually to to prioritize in terms of interest. And that requires a lot of political will. And it requires a sort of cost-benefit analysis. Diba? So if the benefits are much, much higher to the majority of the people, then go for it. If the cost is much higher, then don't go for it. So it needs a lot of diligent work. As the former president said, it needs complete stop work.
Okay, so better surveying and looking at the numbers for more empirical based
Political will,
decision.
not politics.
Political will. All right. Maraming salamat, sir. That was, of course,
Thank you,
Romina
po.
Piano, former Undersecretary for Policy and Planning and Research over at the Department of Agriculture. Salamat, sir.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Jess, for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Maraming salamat po.
Now,
Good morning.
let's pause for a quick break, but coming right up after that. The Bangko Sentral completes the issuance of licenses to 6 lenders that have applied for digital banking licenses. More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us. You're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Now, TV5 and ABS-CBN have agreed to put their investment deal on hold to address issues raised by some congressmen and the National Telecommunications Commission.
A veteran lawmaker says the deal did not violate any franchise laws. Greg Gregorio with the report.
The Philippine Competition Commission will look into whether the landmark deal between ABS-CBN and WeJaQuest, the operator of TV5, will restrict or foster greater competition in the industry. That much it said at the Joint House Committee hearing on the matter.
Perhaps with the investment agreement between ABS and TV5, TV5 will be strengthened to be able to compete more effectively with GMA7. That is something that will be examined by our Mergers and Acquisition Office if we review the transaction.
The PCC also acknowledged that under Bayanihan 2 rules, neither party needed to formally seek their approval.
It is not a merger from our perspective, but it is an acquisition because there is a purchase of shares. ABS-CBN does not need to notify us as a matter of obligation, but 2, they can voluntarily notify us of their transaction. Now, if they don't voluntarily notify us, we can nonetheless, in the Commission, exercise our motu proprio review powers of their transaction.
ABS-CBN is only acquiring 34.9% of the capital stock of TV5, which is well below the threshold of the PCC. But nevertheless, the two firms have decided to put the deal on hold to address issues raised by lawmakers and the National Telecommunications Commission. The NTC insisted that ABS-CBN needs to get clearance from various agencies first.
Dahil po may violations ang ABS-CBN sa amin noon pong 2020, kung saan po ay pay-per-view without authority from the Commission. Kung ito po ay itutuloy ng TV5, ang kanila pong transaction with ABS-CBN, then we would ask for the said clearances to be submitted to the NTC before we can approve po the commercial agreement that they entered into.
But Albay 1st District Representative Ed Salagman questioned this.
I don't think the NTC has the power to amend or impose new restrictions to a legislative franchise. This is a derogation of the legislative power, and we cannot allow Congress, we cannot allow NTC to make a mockery of the franchises issued by the Congress.
The Securities and Exchange Commission has also jumped in, saying it will make a full assessment shortly. The hearing was called at the urging of Representative Rodante Marcoleta, who has long opposed ABS-CBN. At the heart of the matter is whether the deal violates any franchise conditions.
The deal is not a merger, where one entity absorbs another or two entities fuse to form a new one, as defined by the Philippine Competition Act. There is no franchise issue. Section 10 of TV5's renewed franchise under Republic Act number 11320 is not violated by the transaction because there is no sale.
The NTC itself acknowledged they haven't found any violation on TV5's side either.
Tingin niyo po ba may na-violate?
Sa TV5 po, preliminarily wala po kami nakikita.
Local think tank InfraWatch has also urged authorities to let the deal proceed, saying the transaction does not require prior approval from Congress. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
The House Ways and Means Committee has approved the new fiscal regime for the mining sector. Committee Chairman Joey Salceda said the measure will generate an additional 37.5 billion pesos in revenues for the government in its first year of implementation. He said the committee adopted the Finance Department's proposed version, which would, quote, bring the country's effective tax rate on mining to 51% from 38% under the current system, end quote. The committee has also approved the fourth package of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program, which includes the removal of the excise tax exemption on pickup trucks.
Now, over at the upper house, Senate President Mig Zubiri is renewing his push for the SIM card registration bill. That's after he himself was almost victimized by a scammer. Zubiri says he received text messages from a few individuals introducing themselves as local officials. They supposedly asked Zubiri for 60,000 pesos to fund a political convention supporting the Senate president. Zubiri says he has no idea how these individuals got his phone number. That's why he immediately coordinated with the PNP CIDG, and the scammer was soon arrested. Zubiri adds that other senators have also become targets of the scheme. The SIM card registration bill was passed by the previous Congress, but it was vetoed by former President Duterte over concerns on some of its provisions.
Itong nangyari sa akin, yung isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit patuloy po natin isinusulong ang SIM card registration. Matutukoy po natin sino tumatawag sa ating mga scammers. Kaya napakalaga po niyan.
The Agriculture Department says they are not seeing possible movements in the prices of vegetables in Metro Manila following the onslaught of severe tropical storm Florita. Based on initial estimates, the agency says over 600 hectares of farmland in Ilocos were affected by the storm. Most of these are rice lands, but some are vegetable farms. Despite this, Undersecretary Christine Evangelista says the damage will not affect prices of vegetables in the capital region as Ilocos is not its only source.
The supply situation first sa Ilocos Norte because hindi lang naman pong Ilocos Norte ang ating source dito sa Metro Manila. Since we are looking at only 220 metric tons of which 2 metric tons lang po ang gulay dito. The rest is basically rice. So yung gulay natin dito sa Metro Manila, hindi ho natin inaasahan nagagalaw ang presyo dahil po dun sa bagyo.
And this from the Philippine Star. Domestic air travel has recovered strongly in the first half of the year. Domestic air passengers jumped to nearly 10 million in the first semester after the resumption of about 90% of domestic flights. With 9.7 million domestic flights taken from January to June, the country has surpassed the 5.5 million flights recorded for the whole of 2021 and even the 6.8 recorded for the entire 2020. That's mostly brought about by a spike in local travel in the second quarter. All local airlines and operations also saw their numbers improve quarter on quarter, signaling that air travel could be well on its way to a full rebound.
Now, transactions processed by digital banks have reached 8.5 billion pesos in the first half of the year. Now, recall that the Bangko Sentral embarked on a digital payments transformation roadmap to convert 50% of total retail transactions in the country to electronic channels. This as it targets to raise the number of banked Filipinos to 70% by 2023. The Philippine Star reports that digital bank transactions are seen to further rise. That's on the back of the BSP granting certificates of authority to 6 digital banks. These certificates would allow the following banks to start full operations: Union Digital Bank, GoTime Bank, Tonic Bank, Overseas Filipino Bank, Uno Bank, and Maya Bank.
And those are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate front today. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. We are One News, all sides, all the time. But don't go away. We'll give you the latest on the local bourse when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live. Dan, today, U.S. time, central bankers will be meeting in Jackson Hole. Traders waiting with bated breath. What's at stake?
Exactly that, Jess. We're going to be seeing a 3-day, formation of global central bankers. But what traders are really watching out for here is Fed Chair Powell's speech. That's going to be on Friday, and he's going to be talking about the economic outlook over in the United States. It's really just anyone's guess what's going to be happening here. But the Fed officials have been quite clear that they see monetary tightening ahead, and that has of course caused stocks to essentially fade from the rallies. You can see on my terminal here, however, quite a bounce when it comes to the US stocks ahead of the Jackson Hole meeting. Asia, meanwhile, looks set for a steady open. And meanwhile, in the home front, you can see us finally bouncing back after quite a pullback yesterday. We're back above 6,700 levels here, up by 1 3/10%, which are our biggest movers. You can see that on my terminal. Jollibee leading the charge, up by 2 7/10%, together with GT Cap, SMIC, and Metro Bank. But still a few sitting out this rally like Mondanisin, Robinsons, as well as PLDT. And just while we're at it, let's take a quick peek at ABS-CBN on the back of that merger snag. You can see quite, from this picture, this peak here of the mountain was when that merger was, when that buy-in of ABS-CBN was announced, and you had these pictures of that signing of that partnership, so to speak. But after that, it has been quite downhill. But if you take a look at how it's been performing in the past month, it's actually still up just by a hefty 23%. So ABS trading at 11 pesos and 26 centavos just.
All right, but then on the domestic front, there's still one IPO hopeful that has flown under the radar. Who knew we were making used used here in the Philippines? What's the data, the intel here?
Exactly. So did you know, Jess, U2, it's probably one of your favorite bands. They are using gear created in the Philippines by a company called Maker Music, or a company called Music Tribe. And that company has been trying to get investors in, and they value their company at $2 billion. So pretty high here, Jess. But they did not get the stake that they wanted, especially since, market conditions are pretty volatile. And what they're now saying, this is their founder, Uli Beringer. We have some sources close to Bloomberg saying they are now preparing for a potential IPO with JP Morgan. So very exciting here. Where will this IPO be happening? Will it be in the Philippines? Will it be offshore? But good to know that a Philippine company with a valuation of $2 billion is looking to go public, Jess.
All right, that's something, of course, very interesting, something we have to be keeping an eye on. That's it for today, August 25, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News, all sides, all the time.